Welcome to my channel, Andrea Makes, and today I'm going to be showing you how to make this blouse, and it is McCall's 8042, and I'll be making view A. That's what I'm wearing, the short sleeves. Here are the line drawings. And my YouTube friend Linda asked me if I would look into doing a sew along for this pattern, and I told her I would. And when McCall's had their $1.99 pattern sale, I grabbed it, and it's really sweet. It has this ruffly neckline. You put a drawstring, you make a casing and put a drawstring through it. It has this sweet little ruffle detail on the sleeve, and here's the see if I can show you the back. It goes all the way around the back of the neck, and it has a really deep V in the front, which I am not crazy about and didn't realize it was like that, so I'm wearing a yellow tank top underneath. This thing goes really low, so keep that in mind. And what fabric I recommend is light fabric, both in weight and in color. You want it lightweight because you don't want your ruffles too stiff, and you want something light in color to be able to mark your fabric. And I recommend you do what you want to, but for your first one I recommend something that doesn't have a lot of pattern on it so you can see your markings really well. And disclaimer, I do not follow the pattern exactly, so keep that in mind. You may want to watch this through and see how I do it, and then compare it to the pattern instructions and decide which way you'd like to make it. But the way I do it is based on this criteria. After you cut all your pattern pieces out, you want to finish all your edges on all your pieces. I used my serger. The only one you don't need to finish the edges is the drawstring and the top of the ruffle piece. Here's the ruffle piece, and the top has the notch at the top, but you still want to finish the sides and the bottom. So keep that in mind. And another criteria is I pre-crease my pieces, and I don't do any double folds. Any double fold hems, I just do single fold hems. So what that means is, for example, on the ruffle piece, it says the hem is 5/8. So after you cut out your pattern piece with your fabric and you have finished your edges except the top, go ahead and fold up and press your hem, and you'll have a pre-crease there. And also do the same thing on your front bodice piece, your back bodice piece, and the sleeves. And what you're going to do is across the top of your front bodice, your back bodice, and your sleeves, whatever size you're making, and I made size large, it has a fold line marked. And I took a soft measuring tape and measured from the top of my pattern piece to the size I made, and mine was 2 inches. So I went ahead on my fabric and folded it down 2 inches and pressed it, and I had a crease. And that also keeps you from having to mark these lines when you cut out your pattern pieces. Now, my sleeve piece, for some reason, was not 2 inches. It was longer than 2 inches. I don't know if that was a mistake in the pattern or what, but go by your front and back bodice pieces. Both of mine were 2 inches for size large, the fold line. And whatever your back and front pieces are, that will be your sleeve fold line as well. So across the top of all those pieces, go ahead and press them down the measurement after you measurement on your pattern piece. And also go ahead and your hem allowance on your back and front bodice pieces is 1 1/4. It'll be on your pattern piece. So after you cut your fabric out of those pieces, go ahead and fold that up 1 1/4 inches and give it a good press. I call this pre-creasing, and it will help tremendously in all the steps. So go ahead and finish around your fabric pattern pieces after you have them cut out before any construction. Serge around all the pieces except the top of the ruffle piece, and you don't need to do the drawstring. You don't need to finish those. Go ahead and fold down the top of your front and back and sleeves according to the measurement of the size you're making. Give those a good press. And that's the method I will be using for my sew-along. Okay, on the facing piece, go ahead and serge around all these edges also. And as you can see, there are cut lines and slash lines and stitching lines and dots. That will be on the dots and notches, of course. Go ahead and mark those on all your pieces, very important. And I recommend marking your stitching lines and slash line and cutting line on that piece and your front bodice piece using tracing paper and a tracing wheel. I highly, highly, highly recommend marking your pieces with this method on this pattern. I really don't use this a lot, but I highly recommend it on this particular pattern. And here is the front bodice piece, and this is a little mind-boggling. Here's the size large I have cut out. Now you don't, when you cut out your pattern piece, you don't cut this out. You leave this like it is. And you will just follow the lines with the size you're making when you do your tracing with your paper and your tracing wheel. And I'm also going to be saving you a lot of time because the stitching lines that are marked on your front and back bodice pieces and also the sleeve piece, you don't have to mark those ahead of time because I'm going to show you how to do the stitching lines without having to mark. And basically what you will do is you'll have your fabric folded, of course, like we've already talked about. Mine was 2 inches, and then I just measured with my fabric folded the 2 inches because I was making a size large. I just measured how far down. Just pretend this is my fabric. Pretend this is fabric. I've got this folded. And then I just measured how far down my stitching lines were. You have 2 sets of stitching lines for the size you're making, and one set of my stitching line was 2 inches away from the fold and one was 1 1/4 inches away from the fold. So once you have your fabric folded, all you have to do is stitch those lines 2 inches away and 1 1/4 inches away. So you don't need to mark your fabric, and I'll show you how to do that in the sew-along as well. So that will save a ton of time. I've actually done a lot of tips and tricks in this sew-along that will save you a lot of time. I'm also not using bias tape. The pattern wants you, there's about this much of under the sleeve that they want you to put bias tape, and I don't do that because I have nicely finished my edges with the serger, so I just folded mine under and stitched it, and I'll show you that in the video as well. But if you want to do bias tape, go ahead. If what I'm saying right now is confusing, it's going to make sense as you see me do it along the way. So hang in there. So go ahead and cut out all your fabric and finish all your edges except for the top of the ruffle piece. Do your pre-creases with a good hot iron, and then let's get started on this blouse. I have my front facing pinned to the front bodice, right sides together. And I have stitched from the dot down to the other dot and then back up to the other dot. There's my dot. And there's my dot. And then from the dots to the top part of the facing, you change it to a basting stitch. Now we're going to slash it down the center, following the lines you should have transferred using your favorite method. I used a tracing wheel, going from the neck edge to the circle. Just don't cut through your stitches when you get to the end. And then once we've done that, we're going to cut along the cutting lines. I'm going to turn mine over. With the bodice wrong side up to do my cutting lines. Mine looks like that. Then we're going to unpin it. And flip the facing to the inside. There's the back facing. Flip to the wrong side. And then we're going to give that a good press after you turn your facing to the inside. Give it a good press with steam if you use steam, and then meet me back here. Here's what it looks like from the back. And this is where we have pre-creased the folds, of course. If you didn't do that, then it'll look like this. And then here it is from the front. if you would like to understitch your facing, go ahead. I'm not going to. I think giving it a really good press is just fine. So put your front bodice right side up and your back bodice right side down. Your notches. Just here at the side seams. And pin or clip all the way down on both sides, and sew your front and back side seams together, and then meet me back here. After you've sewn your side seams, the instructions say to press your seams to the back, but I pressed mine open. I just prefer that. I think it's less bulk, but you do what you prefer. And then they want you to stay stitch at the bottom of the curve right here. Between, you should have 2 dots there, and just do a line of stay stitching about 1/4 of an inch seam allowance from that dot to that dot, and then do the same on the other side. Just a little stay stitching right there. Now grab your ruffle pieces, and if you pre-creased the hem like I suggested, go ahead and hem that. You should already have it pressed, and just stitch it across for a hem, and do that for your other ruffle piece. And then we're going to gather and attach the ruffle to the sleeve piece. And then grab your sleeve pieces and your ruffle pieces and use the gathering method that you prefer. And what I did is just 2 rows of basting stitches. I did mine about 1 row about 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, and then the other about 3/8. The key to using this method is you have to leave long tails at the beginning and the end. So make sure you don't have short thread tails there. And then grab one of your sleeve pieces and find the notch, and then find your ruffle piece and find the notch, and either choose if you're going to pull your top thread or your bobbin thread. It has to be the same. You can't pull the top thread on one side and the bobbin thread on the other. So choose which one you're going to use. I'm going to use the top thread. Just start pulling on it to gather it. And then you want to make sure your notches match on your sleeve piece and your ruffle piece, and then just keep gathering it until your ruffle piece is the same side as your sleeve piece. And you want to make sure that your notches match up. So gather that up and then meet me back here. When you're sewing your gathered ruffle onto your sleeve, sew it with the ruffle side up, so you can see what you're doing as you're sewing across, and making sure that the ruffles aren't getting like folded over or pushed over, and you can kind of straighten them and gather them and get them neat as you're sewing across, because you can see what you're doing. So sew your ruffle, your gathered ruffle onto your sleeve with the ruffles facing up. Once you have the bottom of your ruffle piece hemmed and your ruffle gathered to the sleeve, and your gathers the way you like it, go ahead and sew the ruffle to the sleeve, right sides together. Just make sure your notches match and your sides match over here. Sew your ruffle to the sleeve, 5/8 inch seam allowance, do that to both sleeves, and then press the seam toward the top of the sleeve. But be careful when you're pressing, and don't press out all those pretty ruffles you just made. So once you've done that to both sleeve and ruffle pieces, you should have both ruffles attached to both sleeves. Now this was really a head scratcher for me. This took me many minutes to figure out how to do this. So get your sleeve piece with the ruffle attached. Put it wrong side up, but get the piece that has 1 notch on the left and 2 notches on the right. So find that and put it wrong side up. I'm going to move this up here. And then find your bodice piece and put it wrong side up as well. Here's the curve. And wrong side up, you want 1 notch on the left and 2 notches on the right. So once you've done that, slide your sleeve piece in that it's wrong side up and has 1 notch on the left and 2 notches on the right. And you're going to put those wrong side up, 1 notch, 1 notch, 2 notches, 2 notches. And then put them right sides together like this. And then match your 1 notch right here. 1 notch, 1 notch. And then continue pinning that one side all the way down, pinning or clipping, and just pin it or clip it as far as it'll go. So there's the 1 notched side. And now we're going to do the double notched side. Here's the top of the other side of the sleeve and the top of the other side of the bodice. Just make sure you unfold your pre-creases that we talked about in the beginning. Right sides together, and then find your double notches, match those up. And then just continue pinning or clipping it all the way down. When you get to that seam of the ruffle and sleeve, put it back up near the top of your bodice. So you're going to have this little part right here. Turn it around. That doesn't have a ruffle or anything attached to it. So that is not incorrect. You didn't do anything wrong. So from here to here is not going to have anything attached. So go ahead and sew that part that you just pinned or clipped, and then do the same to the other side, the other sleeve, and then meet me back here. Here's what it looks like when you have your sleeves sewn on to both sides. Now, this section right here, that doesn't have anything attached to it. Does anyone know why they couldn't have made this go all the way around? I'm confused. But they want you to add bias tape to this little section right here. I'm not going to do that because I've already finished my seams, which I encouraged you to do in the beginning before you started, and I think that's pretty. And it will just naturally fold down because of where we sewed these pieces. So it's going to naturally fold down, and I'm just going to stitch that across. And this is what's going to look like from the outside. And I think that's just fine, especially with the finished edged. But But if you want to use bias tape on yours, go ahead. But here's the other side I did. And plus, this is the underarm. I mean, who's going to be seeing that? And there it is, folded under and stitched down. And I think that looks really nice. So that's what I'm going to do. But if you want to add bias tape to yours, go right ahead and then meet me back here. Since I pre-creased my fold line before I started any construction, and I'm making the large, so my fold line is 2 inches down. So I refolded and repressed all the way around, 2 inches down toward the wrong side. Now I measured from the large fold line to the large stitching lines. And mine is 1 1/4 inches away from the fold and 2 inches away from the fold. So I'm going to stitch my stitching lines 1 1/4 away from this folded edge and 2 inches away from the folded edge. Since I'm sewing 2 inches from my folded edge, that's what my size I'm sewing calls for, and I have folded this down 2 inches, I'm basically going to be sewing right along this edge. So I'm going to sew from this side so I can see what I'm doing for the 2 inches to make sure I'm catching all that. So you measure yours, whatever size you're making, and you make 2 rows of stitching lines according to the size you're making and measuring on your pattern piece. And then meet me back here. Now get your 2 drawstring pieces and match the notches and sew across using a 5/8 seam allowance, back stitching at the beginning and end, and then trim that seam allowance so it won't be so bulky, and press the seam allowances open. And then you're going to fold it right sides together, hot dog style. Notice on your pattern instructions that the seam allowance changes right here. We're sewing our drawstring together with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. All the way down, fold it and pin it or clip it right sides together, and then you're going to sew across the short edge, down the long edge to about halfway, stop, back stitch, leave about a 2 or 3 inch opening for turning, and then start 2 or 3 inches past your opening, back stitch, and then continue sewing down the long edge and then across the short edge, right sides together. And once you've had it sewn, before you turn it right side out, go ahead and trim your seam allowances so there won't be a lot of bulk. Just make sure you don't trim your seam allowance where your opening is. You need a seam allowance there to be able to tuck it inside. So trim it all the way around except where your opening is. And then use your tube turner or favorite tube turning method and turn it right side out, and then either slip stitch or machine stitch that opening closed, and then meet me back here. Boy, that was fun turning that, wasn't it? Okay, now we're going to insert this into our casing that we made across our top with the 2 lines of stitching. So find your favorite way to thread things through, and then just start threading your drawstring through that opening, and then go all the way around, and then make your ends an even length hanging down, and then meet me back here. Now that we got our drawstring through, all we have left is the hem. And if you pre-creased your pattern pieces, like I suggested, it's going to be easy peasy. You've already got a crease there, so just fold it under. Maybe give it another press if you need to, but you've already got your crease ready to go. So do your hem and we are finished. So what did you guys think about the sew along? I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you will join me and sew this blouse. If you do, I would love to see it and share it. So please tag me on Instagram if you make one so I can see it. Or if you're not on Instagram, let me know in the comments below if you made yours. If you did sew along with me and I helped you in any way and you found it fun and enjoyable and learn some things, I do have a tip jar in the description box on this video. You can buy me a virtual cup of coffee through Ko-fi, Ko-fi. If you can't, no worries, no problems at all. If you guys would just continue to like my videos, comment on my videos, share my videos, it helps YouTube promote my videos on YouTube. So thank you so much for all your support, and thanks so much for taking time out of your day to watch my video. If you'd like to see future videos, please subscribe to my channel. I would really appreciate it. See you next time. Bye!